Hey guys, so I just finished building 2 custom rods. I just got the 2-part epoxy on. You can see them drying behind me. And so when I've got a little bit of leftover epoxy from the rod, they've been drying for several hours now, so it's really tacky, but it's not completely dry. One thing I like to do with that is utilize it on some of my topwater baits to get them to dive a little deeper, and I'm going to show you how I do that. I wasn't planning on doing a video right now, but I was going to do a couple for myself, and I'm like, here's a good idea. This is one straight out of my own head. I've never seen or heard of anyone doing this, but it works great. So with topwater baits, depending on which ones they are, especially any of the baits that work without a split ring on the front, like a spook is that way. A popper comes without a split ring on the front. This is a Lucky Craft wake tail. You know, any of these baits are great topwater baits, but there are times when I like to get them to dive. And a good way to do it, I got another one here. That's a Chopo. Chopo is the same way. So, you know, if I'm looking to get a bait to dive, and, you know, if you're talking about a prop bait like this, a Chopo I consider a prop bait when I'm using it for this type of technique where I throw it out, I let it sit, and I just kind of give it a hard twitch and get the props to spin, but I want the bait to stay roughly in the same place. One thing that I do to get that bait to dive deeper in the water, so with a bait like this, you know, or a popper, you know, normally you pull it and it just goes across the surface. If you can get the line tie, you know, your knot at the bottom part of the loop, what it'll do when you pull is it tries to pull the front of that bait down. So if you give it a hard jerk, what'll happen is this bait will actually dive into the water and then float back up to the surface. And with prop baits, I found that to be an excellent triggering technique. Popper is the same way. You know, you get a whole different sound when you get that bait plugging down into the water. You know, with a spook, it's the same thing. You know, if you're trying to really work that bait slow in a tight spot, you can actually get these baits to almost subsurface walk. And the whole key is you have to get that knot from your line at the bottom of the eye. So, you know, how do you do that? How do you get the knot to stay there? Well, that's where my 2-part epoxy comes in. So what I'll do is I actually take the 2-part epoxy, and it's way easier to do when it's tacky. And I'll take it and I'll literally just put right on the tip a dab of epoxy. You can see that there. Okay, so at that point, you know, it's too dry to kind of coil up, so I apply just a little bit of heat. And that'll melt it up, so you'll get a little tiny drop. Let's see if we can get the focus on that. You'll get a little tiny drop of epoxy right at the bottom of the eye. So at this point, what you want to do is you just want to hang that bait off something so it's hanging vertical, so that little drip of epoxy is hanging at the bottom. And I've got, like, I was already doing one, like I said. I wasn't even thinking about sharing this, then I figured I would. This is a Chopo where I've got that same little drip, the same thing. So you hang it upright. You just want to let that fully dry. So I'm not going to touch those until tomorrow. But what'll happen is you'll get a hard little drip, and you tie your knot underneath that drip, and that drip will keep your knot from sliding up the line. And I'll show you tomorrow. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll pick up where I left off right here and just show you the finished product. It's a great little tip, and stay tuned. I'll be right back. All right, I've come back down. It's the next morning. It's probably 18 to 20 hours later. And I like to give my epoxy 24 hours to dry. You don't need that long. You know, I'd say a good 12 hours for sure. But if you really want to make sure that they're cured, I like to give them just 24 hours. And there's no reason to like take the rods off, which are still spinning back here. But the baits that we did yesterday are perfectly good. So I just pulled this one off and I tied a knot on it. As you can see, let's see if we can get that to focus. You can see just the little drop right on the top. And I tied what you do is you tie the knot below it, and then that knot won't come up above that little drip of epoxy that we put on there. So when I'm pulling the bait, my line is at the bottom of the line tie. So when you're pulling your topwater bait, when you pull it, it wants to pull the nose down, and you'll get a diving action out of it. Like you'll actually be able to get the chopper almost to like the shoot under. You know, I've got a pop-R that I did here. I don't know if you can see just barely that little tip sitting there. But the same thing, the pop-R will actually want to chug downward. You'll get a whole different sound out of it. Nice, you know, a nice big bubble out of it. The spook is the same way. You can see I put just a little dib. And the nice thing with the epoxy, you can do this with other things too. But the nice thing with the epoxy is that when it's drying or when it's tacky like it was yesterday, when you heat it up, it becomes a liquid and it will like just form around the eye of your bait. And you'll get a really smooth edge. You don't have to worry about there being a sharp edge. You know, it's basically like continuation of the metal. You know, you can do this in the boat in like a pinch with super glue. You can try to attach, I've tried doing other things like putting little pieces of rubber there and melting the rubber on. It doesn't work. You want something to be hard. And the super glue works okay, but I find that it tends to chip off and you don't get the drip necessarily that you want. And it takes a while for a drip of super glue to dry. And it almost becomes crusty, which I think could potentially have some issue with fraying your line. The epoxy definitely does not do that. But I mean, it's really the key. I mean, you can see I'm putting good pressure on that right now, and that knot will not come above. So, you know, it's all about getting that downward pull. When you pull it, your bait just wants to go down. It gives you a whole different action. I've been doing this for a long time. I don't know that I've ever told anyone about it. It works great. You know, the other thing that you can do too with this is if you have a bait, sometimes you get a bait where you have trouble with the line sliding down and you don't want it to go down. You can do the reverse. You can put a dab of epoxy on, you know, if it's going to just one side, you can put it, say, just on the bottom, and that'll keep the eye of your bait always, or the knot of your line always above that drip, keeping it straight if that's what you want. I've done it on spinner baits. If you've got spinner baits where your line keeps coming down the shank, you can put a little dab on the top of the spinner bait and achieve the same purpose. It's a cool little technique. It really takes no time at all to do it, as you saw. And yeah, I mean, definitely give it a try. It's something that I've used for a long time and has worked great. And it's all just about getting a different position of your knot on that line tie and keeping the knot in that position. And that's what you can do with that drop of epoxy. So give it a try, guys. Let me know what you think. Let me shoot me some pictures of the fish that you catch doing it. I love to get feedback. Give me a like, give me a comment, subscribe to the channel. Lots more tips coming.